Welcome to the Biotech Network's first career development workshop. Hello, Chris. Uh, my name is Mary Canady. I'm the founder of Biotech Networks, and we're on the Hop-In platform. If you have any questions, go to the reception area, and we should be able to guide you from there or ask a question in the chat. Again, for the first hour, I'm flying solo, so might not answer right away, but hopefully it's intuitive enough. And then you can download the presentation at this URL here at the bottom. I also have it in the chat here and also in the main event chat. So without further ado, you can introduce yourself in the chat on the right and also tell us where you're joining us from. And then there's actually different types of chats. So here on the stage, we have the stage chat. So you can ask something here. I'll be a lot more likely to see it here as I'm giving the presentation. We have the main event chat. And then from 1 to 2 in the Pacific time, you'll be able to have a session chat for the session that you'll be in. So if you look on the left, you'll see what's live right now. The stage is live. And then at 1 p.m., the sessions will go live. So you'll be able to join them. So during these sessions, we have Nicole Gabrielle, who is a senior recruiter. She'll be able to answer your questions about resumes, interviews, and mid-career or career changes. And then we also have Markel Morris, who is a very experienced career coach, and she'll be able to answer your questions about general career advice, so taking an overview of your career, resumes, and diverse candidates. And then I will also be available from 1 to 2 during the sessions if you have any questions about today's presentation or LinkedIn and networking, of course, just general questions as well. And I should point out that I'm not a recruiter. I have passed this presentation to recruiters to ask for their advice. And some of the things that you'll hear might be subjective as well. So you want to use your best judgment. So just to go through myself and the session moderators, I'm the founder of Biotech Networks. I have a biochemistry background, and since I got my degree and did my postdoc, I've worked in marketing and communications and diversity and inclusion. And then in 2008, I started Biotech Networks, and we'll learn about them more. Markel Morris is really a great resource. She's a career counselor. I met her, I don't know how many years ago, Markel, maybe you can tell me, at an event where I was very impressed with her advice in career coaching. And she's also moderated a panel for us that you can find on our YouTube channel with 3 other professionals in the recruiting and career counseling area. So you can read her bio here. Nicole Gabrielle, I met her at a Women in Biosciences event. So she's very passionate about helping young women and women in biosciences. And she has a very impressive background. On top of working in as a recruiter, she's also a patent holder and angel investor. So we're very happy to have Nicole. And Markel is saying 15 years ago. So she's we've known each other for a long time. All right. All right, so just to tell you a little bit about Biotech Networks, we started in San Diego in 2008 and really filling that niche of being able to connect scientists at events before the pandemic, at events that were very casual, allowed scientists to really connect. Our signature event is speed networking, which now we are not doing because of the pandemic, but we're thankful to have platforms such as Hop-In, where we're able to have these events where you can interact with people all over the country now, because we've launched in Boston, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And you will be the first to know near the end of this presentation the new regions that we'll be launching before the start of the year. So feel free to check them out. So just to talk about what we'll be going through today. So we're going to tell you about how to set up for success, different templates that you can use, how to make the best first impressions. And then we'll talk about the actual resume content and language. And so these are things you've probably already heard of, but we think that there are some updates that you can use. I actually decided to give this presentation after I reviewed about 15 resumes for the Association for the American Society of Human Genetics. So I did a career session and I looked through 15 resumes and I saw a few things over and over again that I think I can help with. And then we'll talk about adaptive resume strategies. So how do you match each resume to the job description? And with the advent of, the internet, job boards, it's very easy to apply to a job these days. And so there's a lot of candidates. And then also we'll talk about cover letters, yes or no. We did a poll that we'll talk about and with very interesting results, and then resources and next steps. And I just wanted to point out that the emphasis on this workshop is for non-academic positions at life science companies. Of course, if you are in an academic position, we'll have a few slides to tell you about how to turn your CV into a resume. I'm trying to keep up with the questions here. So Markel and Nicole, if you're on, if you wouldn't mind answering if I fall behind. And I'll definitely address everything as well as I can at the end. All right, so just this, bear with me here. I know you probably don't want to go back to the 1400s to talk about resumes, but I do have a point here. So it's thought that the first resume was from Leonardo da Vinci when he wrote a letter to try to get a job in Milan. So this is really fascinating if you want to look it up, and they actually have it here. So jump forward to around the 1950s. Resumes were pretty much required for most jobs. And I don't want to date myself too much, but I actually did get a typewriter when I graduated from high school. So it wasn't that long ago. I wasn't in the 1950s, but typewriters were still in use when I was in college. And if you are a font nerd like me, you'll know that all typewriters use one font, and that's the Courier font. So in the 80s, personal computers made resumes a lot more easy to design as well as to send. However, during that time, jobs were still listed in newspapers and trade magazines. And I know some of you on this call might think that's ridiculous, but it's just the way it was because there was no internet. So jump to the 2000s, our favorite America Online, if you can remember the sound of your modem booting up. So at this point, there started to be online job postings. You could start to email your resume, which is a big thing, because back in the 50s, even to the 80s, you'd go out and buy special paper that you'd print your resume on, for those of you who don't remember that fun experience. And so jump to the 2010s. Of course, LinkedIn. I hope that you're all on LinkedIn by now. So you're able to make a resume on LinkedIn, and recruiters and hiring managers do use this a lot, and you can use it a lot. We'll be talking about this in our next workshop. But the truth is that a lot are still relying on the text of your resume, and that's here in the 2020s. So as I mentioned, it's a lot easier to apply to a job. So that means there's more people applying, and recruiters are using, and at companies as well as outside of companies, are using software to determine which candidates to invite for interviews. And so the reason that I go through this history is because when I was reviewing resumes for the conference that I talked about, it seemed to me like a lot of people were still back here in the 1980s. So they have one resume, they think that's a one size fits all, and you really need to think about adapting your resume. It's very easy to make different resumes for each job, and we'll talk about how to do that. So I just want you to think a little bit. where is your resume on this timeline, and think about how that you can compete with other job seekers. All right, so if you are in academia and now you have a CV, you probably know this, but I'm just offering the resources that you will need to change your resume into a CV. I mean, you'll need to change your CV into a resume, and so the resume is like the cover for your CV book. So don't think about it that you've done all this work for nothing, because a lot of the things you did, you grew as a person, you have a lot of subject matter expertise, but you just need to present it differently to get a job in industry. And so you want to summarize your accomplishment, and you can also still keep your CV updated and just keep it for reference. You probably won't, once you get into industry, you probably won't go back into academia, but it's always good to keep everything in one place. And then you want to highlight your scientific proficiencies. And you also want to think about, when you get a job in industry, you're still probably going to get a job working for another scientist. And so even when you're in R&D, definitely, if you're in marketing, product management, etc., you still will want to have your scientific proficiencies on there. For example, if you worked in CRISPR or gene editing, you would want to keep that. And then you also want to translate your academic skills. So you might not think about it too much, but you've done a lot of project management as a grad student and or a postdoc. And, it's not easy working with other scientists. So, this is definitely a skill. Also teamwork. So you've certainly had publications and worked with other scientists, and that's just one piece. And so, this workshop isn't all about making your CV into a resume. So this is the only slide about this, but there are tons of resources on the internet, and you can search for transferable skills. That's one of the keywords. And you can also just go to Google and search convert CV to resume. So again, just think about it a little bit differently, and remember that you're entering a new phase. And definitely there's a lot of jobs for people who want to come straight from academia and go right into industry. That's definitely one of the major job pools. So just talk about, you may have heard about different types of resumes. So the traditional resume is chronological. So all your work experience is in reverse chronological order. And then it's come up that there's something called a functional resume, where it's a description of your skills in each area. And from my experience, STEM hiring managers want the chronological resume, and you just think, they want the facts. They don't want to be glossed over on what you've done. So they want a chronological resume. And so what a lot of people do is they use a combined format, where they have a chronological template, and then they have a skills section at the top. And we'll be sharing some links to resume templates, and you can see that this is what people, it's easy to find a template. So speaking of templates, so again, text content is the most important for initial screen. So we have the image of the funnel. They're definitely funneling through everyone who's applied for the job to find out who's the best, and the best to use is text. So you don't need to add graphics or video. If you were an artist, for example, you might want to have an online portfolio, but in STEM fields, content and text is king. So companies, especially larger companies, use something called applicant tracking software, or ATS. So you want to get your resume through that ATS. So you want to use a compatible template. And so things to remember is that you don't want any tables, You don't want columns, headers, or non-standard fonts. And so if you have downloaded the presentation, or it's very easy to type in, you can go to jobscan.co, and they have many templates that are ATS compatible. All right, so it's also important to remember that first impressions matter. And so you've probably seen the recruiters have only a couple seconds to review every resume, and hiring managers as well. And it's just really important to set a good first impression. So you want to use a single, modern, and accessible font. So you don't want them to pull up your resume and not have that font on their computer. And I'm in marketing. I love fonts. And one of the things I noticed is that many of the resumes still had Times New Roman font. And maybe you think that this is a detail, but it was, it pointed out to me that the people who created this resume are probably in academia, and they have that academic mindset. And quite honestly, I don't ever see Times New Roman font except for in some resumes. So again, this is subjective, but I would suggest a more modern font such as Arial, Calibri, which is the default for Microsoft Word, or Georgia. And fun fact, Times New Roman was used so often because it was good for print, and also it became the default font for Microsoft Word back in 1992. So that's why a lot of people use it. But you may print out your resume, but these other fonts work just as well. And again, you want to think, more modern. All right, so keep the font and the formatting same throughout the resume. Don't have any font less than 10 points. This isn't back in the day when you're trying to, cram as much on one page, or conversely trying to fill a page as much as you can with a larger font. And so, there's no hiding. You really just, if you can't fit it on 1 or 2 pages, and we'll talk about that when you should do 1 or 2 pages, then you really need to consider being more succinct. And again, you've done a lot. If you're in academia, you've done a lot of summarizing, you've done a lot of thinking about what you've done. And if you haven't, this is a good time, but make it as succinct as possible. So I want to suggest that you use spell check and Grammarly. So, and what I'm showing here is, hopefully you can see the mistake. I don't mean to be talking down to you, but I have problems with some homonyms as well. But you can see here, your and your are in the wrong place. And Microsoft Word isn't exactly going to pick that out. I have discovered that in the newer versions of Microsoft Word, they actually have a grammar feature. So you may not need to pay extra for Grammarly, but it's always a good idea. And then you also want to send to a colleague to proofread, and preferably a native English speaker in the US. And, I only speak one language. I'm not cutting anyone down whose second language is English, but first impressions matter. And it's hard to know when you're reading a document, did this person make a mistake because of English is their second language, or were they being sloppy? So again, I don't mean to offend anyone, but you just want to put your absolute best foot forward and ask someone to review it. And when I've given these workshops before, I've actually had groups who have taken my workshops, and they've gone and had a little party, and they've all worked on their resumes or their LinkedIn profiles together. So it's certainly something that you could consider doing. It might not be the most fun party that you've ever been to, but you'll get a lot done. All right. All right, so in the setups, just the basics. Who are you? And I don't want to be pedantic, but I did read while doing research for this presentation that some people just don't think about it, and they leave off either their phone number or their email address. And you need to remember, regardless of what generation you are, Gen X, baby boomer, there are different ways that people want to get a hold of you. And I've had many recruiters just call me. So it is good to have your phone number on there. And maybe you've got your hiring manager is a millennial or even Gen Z. Maybe they want to text you instead. So include everything. Again, LinkedIn is a must-have. If you haven't made a profile, you really need to, because it helps in a lot of ways. Physical address is not needed, and actually it can confuse people if you're looking for a job in a different area. So you don't want your physical address floating around the internet. You don't want to put it in there. Additionally, you don't need to add references. This is another security issue as well. You don't want to be putting someone else's contact info out into the ether. And then you don't even need to put references upon request, because they will ask you if they want references. Again, email addresses, goes in the same category as fonts. It's one of my things. Don't use an old type of technology. It shows that you may not be current with the times. I have an aunt and an uncle that had a Juno.com, if you can remember that, and kind of puts people in a certain category. And again, I don't mean to offend anyone, but this is your first impression, so you don't want to use some outdated account. You want to be seen as more current. So you can use Gmail, and who knows, maybe in the next 5 years, Gmail will be considered not good. But for now, I think it's a professional way to use your email. You can create your own domain. I've seen people do that. You can use Outlook, your alumni address, or .me. Pretty much anything except for these old school email addresses. And then you want to keep the first part simple and professional. I used to have a Yahoo domain that had my nickname as a child, which I won't tell you. It's maybe you can ask me later on the video. And I have my dog's name on there too, because I'm a big dog lover. And you don't want to have that in there for professional reasons. And also, if you have a busy recruiter or hiring manager, you want them to remember you from your email. So try to put your name in it. If try not to put too many numbers. And then also no birth or graduation year. So again, you don't want any information that you don't have to give them. Age discrimination can go both ways. They can think you're too young or you're too old. So speaking of which, unconscious bias. So you may have been hearing a lot about this over the past few years. As a society, we've come to realize that there are a lot of unconscious biases that take place in all aspects of life. And one area is when in the hiring process. So it's when you judge people based on stereotypes, or you judge people that don't look like you. And so one of the ways that it can come forward in the hiring process is that hiring managers or recruiter may hire you based on your past experience and not on your potential. So some of the underserved groups have a harder time because the person doesn't look like them who's hiring them, and they can't imagine them in that situation or doing that job. And the easiest example I can think of is, the fact that the vast majority of the presidents in the United States are a white male. And, we just have a hard time, in my opinion, imagining anyone else than a white male in that position. And again, that's just an example, and it's, based on facts. You can look it up. So, you really want to make sure that you're not asking the hiring manager to connect the dots on whether you can do this job. You want to give them as many examples as possible. And you also want to change your resume so that you can avoid having unconscious bias. So you don't want to put a headshot in. And I know this may sound contrary because our LinkedIn profiles almost always have headshots, but you can on LinkedIn change your photo to not be public. And again, some may say, I don't want to work for a company that's going to judge based on the color of my skin or how old or young I am. But, I'm just telling you that, to get through this initial screen, you might want to make these changes to give yourself the best possible um, chance. So your name or your ethnicity, if you feel as though your name is going to cause anyone to have bias against you, you could consider using your initials. And then if you're a more experienced candidate, such as myself, you should worry less about gaps and more about a career progression. Some people say you want your resume to tell a story about you. So for example, over the last year and a half, I've worked in the area of diversity and inclusion. And some people may think that was a departure from what I had worked in before, but I'm able to describe it in my resume as well as interviews, that it's a passion of mine that I've had for a long time. And then also you want to be choosy about including experience that's more than 15 years old. So for me to include something more than 15 years ago, I have to have a really good reason to include it. So, rule of thumb. And then also we'll be talking about in the next few slides, you want to create an adaptive resume to show that you can do the job. So as we were talking about the presidency, if Hillary Clinton were to, not to get into politics, but if she were to try to show that she can do the job, she would be talking, painting a picture that she's done all these different things so that she can get the job that, it's hard to imagine a woman doing that job. And then I thought I had one more bullet on here. Again, this advice is subjective. You want to use your own judgment. You want to also consider that, as I mentioned, perhaps if someone were to screen you due to any of these things, you might not want to work at that company. That's completely, subjective. And working with career coaches and recruiters like Markel and Nicole are a great way to kind of, navigate those waters. So you'll be able to talk to them from 1 to 2 U.S. Pacific time today. So to talk about your resume content, the outline. So again, I suggest that you use this combination resume that is chronological, but that also has a skills section. So you want to start with your summary. And this used to be, back in the day, an objective. And now you want to make this into almost like you're speaking the elevator speech. So I neglected to add, we actually have done presentations and workshops about elevator speech. I don't have that on the landing page now, but I will add that. We've done workshops on the elevator speech because during speed networking, a lot of people use their elevator speech, the speed networking events that we do. So I will add that. But basically, and again, on the internet, there are many, many resources about the elevator speech, but basically who you are and what value you bring. And I've been reading recently that companies want to know what your passion is, what your story is. And this is a great way to put that in. And then you want to have a skills section. And so this is what we talked about, kind of a piece of what would have been a functional resume if you were going to do that. So you want to put keywords for the jobs. We'll be talking about that in a bit. And then also you want to have a section that you can easily change out sections if you're going for a different position. And then after that, you want to list positions in reverse chronological order. And it should show a progression of responsibilities, especially if you worked at one company and you moved up within that company. So be sure to split out those. Let's say you had 2 positions where you moved from an assistant manager to a manager, then you want to have those 2 positions to show. And then my advice and what I've read is that if you're an early stage candidate, you should have a 1-page resume, so 5 to 10 years experience. If you have more than 10 years experience, you can have a 1 or 2-page. And again, that's something you can specifically ask Markel and Nicole afterwards, because I am not a recruiter, but this is, as a hiring manager and the research I've done, this is what I would suggest. All right, so that's the content. And then high level. So you want to think about what do companies want? And again, you're probably going to be interviewing with a scientist. Scientists are probably going to be looking over your resume at some point. So they want to have that subject matter or research area experience. So it's very important. You can move into different areas. I'm in the field of marketing, so I have a little bit more leeway because I'm not, working in R&D, but you do want to include that. Your technical proficiencies, so what you can do, especially if you're looking for a laboratory position, that's very important. Again, you want them to know that you can actually do the job, run the HPLC, etc. Ability to work on the team. You probably heard this, drilled in. And I think the reason that I put it in is that a lot of academics feel like the perception of an academic is that they're, off on their own, doing their own thing. But if you think about it, how often you really are working on a team, you can pull out those skills. Leadership experience. So this is a great time for you to think about, when you've led groups, let's say you have a postdoc association at your work, or let's say if you work at a company, you are part of an employee resource group, which we just had an event about. So you want to just really kind of, challenge yourself to think about that. If you don't have any leadership experience, this is the time to think about it. Someone asked if we can get the presentation later. If you scroll up, you can get to the link to download it. So leadership experience, if you don't have already, you can also volunteer. So here in San Diego, we have the San Diego Entrepreneurs Exchange. So I mentioned earlier, Biotech Networks isn't having in-person events, but the San Diego Entrepreneurs Exchange is, and they have a lot of great volunteer opportunities. And, what happens in these organizations is anyone, to make a sports analogy, anyone can step to the plate, and anyone can, just show up and get leadership experience. And I'm simplifying, but it's a great way to show that you can lead if you don't feel like you're getting the experience at your place of work. So organizational skills, of course, scientists are great at that. You may not think about it, but one of the side effects of me being a scientist, I still consider myself a scientist even though I'm in marketing, is that I can put a spreadsheet together about just about anything, and I can organize in that way. Also, communication is key if you want to work on a team, especially because there's a perception that a lot of scientists are introverts and may not want to communicate as their first instinct. And so you want to think about times that you've done that. And then outcomes, of course, all companies are exists to make money. So you want to try to put your work in the context of that. So, what did you achieve and experience do you have? And, because again, companies make money, anytime you can add percentages or other metrics, especially tied to money, are great. And I know those of you that are working in academia, it may sound difficult unless you've written a grant that you've been able to secure funds. But here's just some examples here. And you just really need to think outside the box. Okay, so resume language in general. So you've probably all heard that you need to use action verbs to showcase your accomplishments. So an example is that you collaborated with leaders in your field to establish a new paradigm. And as scientists, we are taught to use passive language. So the sample was agitated for 30 seconds, etc. And so you just really need to think, beyond that and be more active in your language, as well as, this is the time that you need to brag. Scientists are taught to not brag, but if you're going to brag, this is the time to do it in your resume. So when I reviewed the resumes I was talking about for the coaching session that I did, I realized that a lot of scientists did use these action words, but they chose ones that weren't as strong. So you want to just, really be bold and don't be shy and use strong action words. And, you can Google, there's, hundreds of lists on the web that you can use. And then uh, you want to avoid using the same word more than once. I mean, I think the word develop, it's really hard to not use the word develop uh, many times. So one of my favorite resources is thesaurus.com. So you can add variety. But again, the lists, there's a lot of lists out there, and don't be shy. All right, so I want to talk about creating an adaptive resume. So if you remember back to the analogy of when resumes started and how they should be progressing, but I think that I keep going back to that Times New Roman font. I think a lot of people think that they're set in stone, and you just have one resume, and that you need to have more than one resume to compete for jobs. So recruiters and hiring managers, they want to find that perfect fit. They want to think that when they're holding your resume, that wow, I can't believe they can do all this. Because I think that you know so many people think that people only have one resume, that even hiring managers think, wow, this is their resume and it fits. And they don't really think that you might have many resumes, but there's nothing wrong with that. So many of us can adapt to different roles. So as I've talked about, I've worked in marketing and communications, I've worked in diversity and inclusion. I'm also the founder of Biotech Networks. I've been considered for positions that are a CEO position. So to take that as an example, oops, I wrote the wrong way. I want to go through how to make an adaptive resume. So you start with your original resume, and then you also will do set up job alerts on LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, etc., to look for different areas that you can work in. And as I mentioned, I can work in marketing or communication or diversity and inclusion. So you actually create these folders, and this will become important so that you can keep these resumes separate. So you put your original resume in these folders that are named for the job types that you're going to be looking for. And then you do your keyword research. And I like to actually print out the job description, sit in my easy chair and really just pay my full attention to doing that pattern recognition that our brains have been wired for as scientists and humans. And I actually physically underline what the important keywords are, because you'll be amazed if you sit and you really concentrate on it. You really will start to see some trends, and you need to take advantage of that. Of course, I'm a little bit older than maybe some of you, and maybe more tied to having printouts, but you can certainly use a highlighter online. But I really urge you to go through the actual experience of really carefully looking at that job description and getting the keywords out. So for each type of job, you'll find these keywords. Again, for me, I like to underline a physical copy. And then you'll go to your original resume and you'll add these keywords to the resume in your marketing folder. And so these blue resumes start to become, this blue resume starts to kind of evolve and adapt into a resume that is more suited for marketing positions, whereas the orange one would be more for communications positions. And then you do the same thing with the cover letter here. And so you just keep them all in these folders, and it doesn't matter if they all kind of evolve into different types of resumes, because you know that you can adapt as well. You can evolve to do different jobs. And so, oops, wrong way. And so then you would submit these to each job. And it's easy these days. When I first started doing this, I thought, how am I going to remember which one I sent? But you usually email it, or you can use a file name that will help you to keep track of it. So this is how you compete with a lot of other people that might be applying for the same job, to make a resume that is true to what you can do, but also just highlights exactly what you can do for that job, and not make these busy recruiters and hiring managers have to connect the dots, because maybe another resume doesn't make them do that mental exercise. So this is the same procedure. I've just written it out in text. I know people learn in different ways. And also, if you're just downloading this presentation, I wanted to have this available. All right. And don't be afraid to have more than one resume. It's really, the way that you can compete better than, someone else is looking for the job. All right, so as I mentioned, Markel and I have known each other, or Markel mentioned that we've known each other for 15 years. And so I've been following her on LinkedIn. She did a workshop for us. And so she had this great idea that you should track your accomplishments using, I would like to use a spreadsheet. As I mentioned, I'm very attached to spreadsheets, and I've actually started doing this. So thank you so much, Markel. And so just think about all the things that you've done, because sometimes we forget, and sometimes a job wants a specific skill that you just can't quite remember. So putting it all into a spreadsheet, and you can get really fancy and put things in categories and say, this is a marketing skill, this is a project management skill, and just pull those out, and then you can copy and paste those into your adaptive resume. And so it also helps with cover letters and interviewing. And this is a really great idea. And you can ask Markel about this during the Q&A section, which will be starting in a little more than 15 minutes. All right, and then resume language for software. So, you think about this robot's going to be going through your resume possibly before any human is. So you want to spell out all acronyms. So I know a lot about search engine optimization, but if I put in just SEO, my phone is ringing, sorry. If I put in SEO and I don't spell out search engine optimization, and the algorithm is looking for the spelled out acronyms, then I'm out of luck. Then also make sure you're using the same terminology as the company. So are you an expert in gene editing and CRISPR? The same thing. Be sure to put both. And you can get clever and include both of them if you're not sure. So again, you want to have the skills section that you're going to have your keywords in to help. You're going to use the adaptive resume strategy. And then you can also submit a cover letter for additional keyword inclusion. And one of the things I learned actually from Markel's panel about recruiting is that you can compare your resume to the job description using jobscan.co. And so I actually tested it out, and it's not as good as my pattern recognition. But again, it's another thing that you can use, and there's probably more software out there, but it's a good start, and it'll help you to get through. So speaking of cover letters, so we did the same poll on LinkedIn and Twitter, and it looks like my animation isn't quite working. So we did the same poll and asked, when applying for jobs, are cover letters worth the time it takes to write them? So of course we would always like to write cover letters, but what's happened to me in the past is I bookmark a job. I have every intention of sending a cover letter, but I just don't. And then by the time I get back to it, the job is no longer available. They've already chosen someone else. So on LinkedIn, just barely, we say that cover letters aren't worth the time. And on Twitter, with a big majority, they say they are worth the time. So, if you're interested, you can look up these polls under Comprendi or my LinkedIn account, and you can see the details. But basically, on Twitter, people assumed that it was for an academic position. So probably the fact that I put PhD life and postdoc life hashtags. Also, I think Twitter tends to have more academic conversations. So I like to say the results are clear as mud. So how do you resolve this when you're taking time to in your job search, especially if you have another job and you don't have that much time for your job search? So just to go through the comments and to help you understand. So this person is positive for cover letter, or I'm sorry, this should be a con, apologies. So this person says that networking is far more effective, that your cover letter should be contacting the hiring manager or the recruiter. And so this one is pro, ignore this part. So this recruiter says that they love cover letters, and you can share different things like your relocation preferences, etc. So how do you resolve this? So the pros are that they show genuine interest. Nicole has commented that hiring managers like the cover letters. You can add keywords to get through the screen. You can highlight and summarize to show that you fit the position if it's not clear from your resume. And then you can also talk about relocation. And the cons, as I mentioned, you could delay your resume submission to a point where they're not looking, they're going down the road with another candidate, or you may submit fewer resumes. So this is my advice. Submit them if you have time, but don't delay your application more than a few days. And again, I'm big on using external tools. I suggest that you put a Google Calendar, bookmark the job and put a Google Calendar in. Okay, remind me in 3 days if I haven't submitted this and I don't have time to write a cover letter, just submit it. During my job searches, I would say that 50 to 75% of the interviews that I've gotten have been with no cover letter. So, it's, again, subjective. And then Heather Dillon from UCSD says it's a great way to demonstrate your communication skills. So thank you so much, Heather. Nice to hear from you. All right, so just to talk about what we talked about setting up for success. We talked about templates that you can use, especially one that is applicant tracking system ready. First impressions are important. They may sound like little changes that you can make. Then we also talked about the strategies. And then also we talked about resume content and language. So action words, and I would put this in all caps because I think scientists are trained to be passive. We are trained to be, to not brag. And I can tell you in academia, that's more the case. In industry, again, you're probably going to be working for another scientist, but it's more it's okay to talk about your successes. And we talked about showing your career progression and also outcomes, which is important for companies. And then I think, if you take away just one thing from this presentation, you need to have an adaptive resume, and you don't need to be afraid that having more than one resume is, cheating. Cover letters, again, if you have time, yes. If you don't delay. So we have about 10 minutes left. Resources and next steps. So you can download the presentation, and we'll be adding the video soon. You can watch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So we have a specific playlist for career development. So we've got some great presentations on personal branding and the recruiter panel that I talked about that Markel Morris led. That was really a lot of insights. And then the next career development workshop will be in January. I have not decided the date, but I'll be talking about networking and LinkedIn, which are, the next steps after working on your resume. And then you can also follow our job boards. So in these 4 regions right now, these are links to all of them. It's pretty simple. It's just bcbn.org/jobs, sdbn.org/jobs. And then I'm excited to announce that we'll be doing our first career fair covering the Northeast. So we've been working on the West Coast. We've had 2 career fairs that have gone really well. I think we've had about 800 people attending and about 8 or 9 companies at each one. And now we'll be covering Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York State, and New Jersey. And these also represent new biotech networks that will be starting before the beginning of the year. And so you can get to them by going to bit.ly/BNFair3. I'll put that in the chat as soon as I get a chance. So we're really happy about that. And then the virtual career fairs, I know, we're waiting for the other foot to drop on, the next Greek letter that we're going to learn about with COVID. But I think career fairs are going to be here to stay, because I don't know if you've ever been to a real career fair in person, but it's as awkward as you can imagine when you're walking around with your resume. And basically you can go to a virtual career fair over lunch and meet a lot of great companies. All right, so this session will go live. I think that you can get in at 12:55. It might be 1 p.m., but I'll be watching the sessions. The little red light will turn on. So hopefully I've talked enough about Markel and Nicole that that you can go there for questions, and then also I'll get over there just as soon as I can. So that will be on the left side on sessions. And I'm trying to remember if I have I don't have any more. But let me just go through, since we have a few minutes, I will go through some of the questions that we have. Thank you so many people for asking questions. So somebody asked, how can someone describe technical skills learned as a graduate student? And again, I hope I covered that during this, but one of the things that you can Google is transferable skills. So there's a lot that is out there about how you can think about the different types of qualities that a company wants based on what you've done as a grad student or a postdoc or even an undergrad. It's getting a degree in a STEM field or STEM adjacent field is not easy, and so scientists do appreciate that, hiring managers and recruiters. And of course, if you want to ask your questions now, you can also ask them in the chat. How does one avoid the resume going into a black hole and never being heard from again? And so I think, this is something that we'll be covering in our LinkedIn and networking workshop. But in general, you really need to try to get a foot in the door. And the way that you can do this is email the person who posted the job. So if the job was advertised on LinkedIn, probably about 30% of the time you'll be able to see who posted it, and you can reach out to them and make it as personable as possible. I applied for this job, I wanted to know more about it, if you can help me. And you can even ask who the hiring manager is. They may or may not tell you. And then also you just want to try to get to either the hiring manager or somebody at the company that can or that knows someone that that can vouch for you. And this is where the great tools of LinkedIn come to play. So there's actually a little trick that if you are in the same group with someone, you can email them. And I'll be covering that in January. If you look hard enough on the YouTube channel, it's probably on there, or it's on the Comprendia YouTube channel, my consulting company. But there is a trick, but you need to join the right groups on LinkedIn. So we have a question here. Any suggestions for a rural biotech applicant looking for strictly remote positions? One of the things I've seen with remote positions is there are a lot of applicants. And I don't know if this means that, 90% of the applicants are, not even qualified at all. There's someone who's just seeing, applying for, oh, okay. So I think Markel is saying, ideally, your job search will include activities to get professional visibility, so you stand out in advance. I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think networking and looking for anything that will make you stand out. I have noticed that some companies are they're not as they'll have a lot of people working remotely, but when it comes to the job, they'll say, "Oh, this position isn't remote," even though you know that it can be remote. So I would say try applying for jobs that you can see the possibility that it would be remote, and just try to see, because there's going to be fewer applicants for that. And then again, just look for any type of in that you would have at that company. And that's definitely, as far as a rural biotech applicant, you definitely want to send a cover letter. You definitely want to try to get in contact. So people working in offices, you can actually just call the main line of the company, just ask to talk to, if you figured out who the hiring manager is. I wouldn't try that on a cell phone number, but you can get creative about sending this type of information out. And of course, COVID has changed. Again, also, we provide networking events, so it's definitely something that you can try to connect with people online. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. So how can we find recruiters on LinkedIn? I think that, of course, Markel and Nicole, you can talk to them about that. But I would start with the actual companies. So there's Aerotech, there's Kelly, the old school. Kelly was the old school recruiting company, even probably back in the 60s. Yeah, I would start with the companies and then go from there. And, really, I would just search life science recruiter. And I think you'll come up with some good results. So someone asked what the best resume format is. And we talked about that, the combination of having chronological template, but then adding an extensive skills section. Someone said, what value can you place on paying for LinkedIn Premium? So personally, I do not think it's worth to pay for LinkedIn Premium. I don't really see I don't really see a benefit myself. It gives you some salary information. It gives you when you're a top applicant, but again, it's all based on artificial intelligence. And I think I'm the top applicant for a lot of positions that I don't personally think that I am. So recruiters may think differently. They may see people who've paid for the premium service as being more more desirable as a candidate. So, and Nicole says LinkedIn has lost its luster. Okay. Looking for questions that I can answer. Specific ways to show remote work capabilities. So I've heard a lot of people talking about the LinkedIn courses and the LinkedIn skills assessment. So I don't know what Markel and Nicole feel about that, but I've heard a lot of people saying that, the content is good on the LinkedIn. So Nicole says Twitter is better maybe for networking, but yeah, there's all sorts of classes you can take. If you're into, for example, Google marketing, there's all sorts of Google certifications you can take. I would suggest that. What is the most effective, efficient way to get an interview for a job that you really want? I would say put the time into the resume, fit it, make it. Imagine that you're the hiring manager and you want to read a resume that you feel like, oh, wow, this person, their whole career. And, you don't want to be, you're not going to be disingenuous, but there are ways that you can highlight things that you've done. If we think about everything that we do in a year, and if you have 10 years of experience, you really want to adapt the cover letter and the resume as much as you can. Okay, so someone is asking about the ATS compatibility. I use a table to format the whole resume into 2 columns, and then I hide the table margins. I don't know that, but I would say no. I actually am, after doing the research for this, because I don't know everything about ATS, I actually had my name in the header. So I'm going to take my name out of the header. So I would say download one of those templates. And, I think also going back to the old, okay, what should my resume look like? Back in the 80s, and the fancy paper. Now it's all about the text. So, I don't, maybe Nicole and Markel disagree with me. Oh, and I see that, the sessions are live now. All right. So I'm going to head out. Markel says the best approach is a focused, strategic, and consistent. And then Nicole says pursue an informational interview. All right, I'm going to head over to the sessions. So go to the left and click on sessions, and I will meet you over there, or be very happy if you would ask Markel and Nicole your questions, because of course I don't know everything. The resume, focus on optimized content. What if you already know the person and can't reach them because you are not a first connection? I would try joining a group. And when I have a list of the biotech groups that you're pretty much, if somebody has joined a group, they've joined probably, between 3 and 5 groups that I know of. So that's the best way. The other way, and again, I hope I'm not making it sound to make, giving advice that will make an issue for hiring managers, but there are a lot of places where you can find out what the format of their email is. Like, so for Johnson & Johnson, just Google what is the format for Johnson & Johnson emails, and you can pretty much, guess at that. But it's just an email. So, all right, so I'm going to head over. So thank you, everyone, and I will see you in the sessions. Thank you.